I worked at a supermarket since I was 16 and received my indefinite employment contract 4 years later, thanks to becoming friends with the manager who was about to switch with another manager from another part of the country. Therefore, I was given the contract. The team leaders and the new manager didn't expect me to stay there for another 2 years afterward. Basically, the higher-ups prefer their employees cheap, so they either hope that the older employees with an indefinite contract leave soon after receiving the contract, or they give them the worst tasks possible, making them go home according to the maximum hours stated in the contract. Most of the time, I worked 14 hours a week rather than 8, which was beneficial for my bank account. They had me clean the lower parts of the refrigerated food sections with a sponge and water. It can be painful due to the cold and somewhat humiliating for a person of my height to be crouching to clean these areas. However, I started to become very talkative with the customers and enjoyed the chats. I acquired some gloves to make the work easier and more comfortable. I also loved the expressions of the team leaders when I told them I had to go home because of my maximum hours, even if there was still a large amount of work left. It was great to be back home by 9 p.m. and relax. I worked there for 9 years, with 3 of those years devoted to cleaning. In summary, the higher-ups didn't like that I was expensive to keep as an employee, so they assigned me the worst tasks with the least hours possible. I didn't mind and continued working there for another 3 years. Edit. Bad English. Story 1. Our assistant manager has changed the schedule several times without notice, then tries to get us written up for being late or not showing up. I document the schedule by photographing the screen, since we cannot access it at home. After having to come into Human Resources twice on my day off to prove the schedule had changed, I began writing her up for every single time change without notification. She is let off the hook because I am just a peon, but she still had to walk to Human Resources to dispute them. A few other people started doing the same. When she had to answer for 5 instances of it in a week, she was reassigned back to floor nursing on another unit. Story 2. When I worked at a grocery store, I was in the meat department. We closed the counter at 8 and cleaned until 9. My department manager said if we finished cleaning early, we could head out. But he worked 9 to 5, so he wasn't around. I worked there for some years, and as time went on, one of the front-end managers who handled closing didn't like us leaving early. It wasn't up to them. They were not my boss. At some point, they implemented a policy where we had to call the front desk, and they had to come verify cleaning was done and sign off on it. The manager who didn't like us leaving early would say he was coming when we called, but then he just wouldn't come until 9 to verify so that he could keep us there the whole time. So my solution was, after I finished cleaning, I would just walk to the front desk and find him and tell him I was ready. He would say, "Okay, be right there." And I would say, "Okay, I'll wait." And I would just stand right next to him until he went to check. He hated that. Story 3. I worked in a call center that had a keycard security entry at all outside doors. My team supervisor was a tool who would penalize the smallest deviation from any rules, yet he ignored them when it suited him. One day, when entering, I realized too late that I had forgotten my keycard at home. A friend swiped me in. I was reprimanded and told that everyone had to swipe their own card or they weren't allowed entry, under any circumstances. Fast forward about 3 weeks later. The supervisor went outside to smoke on break and left his keycard on his desk. It was heavily snowing and probably 5 below with wind chill. I went to the break room, past the door he was banging on, and ignored him. About 45 minutes later, he finally entered the building and called me to his office and asked me why I didn't let him in. I half-heartedly apologized and said that, unfortunately, it was against company policy. Story 4. Last day at a job, been at the place for 5 years. Going around, last chat with different folks in different areas. One guy who always tried to get a reaction from me. I walked up to him and said I never bothered to learn your name. Walked off happy. Story 5. I learned that my manager hated me and wanted to fire me, but I was so good at my job and well-liked by the rest of the company that Human Resources wouldn't let her. I showed up on time every day and completely ignored her. I would take smoke breaks and socialize with the other department heads. When I finally got a better job and could escape her, I gave her flowers. She was such a toxic bully. I've never encountered someone so deliberately malicious, and to this day, I don't know exactly why she decided I was the main target of her scorn. I think it might be because I requested a day off to go to a wedding the second month I worked for her. After I left, 7 others quit within a month, for on the same day. And then the new group didn't last 3 months. And then she got fired. Story 6. I was a medical assistant for a very wealthy, pretty arrogant doctor. They regularly didn't finish or even properly code charts, which meant we didn't get paid for anything we did. Yet they never knew why we were losing money. They let the unfinished charts pile up into the hundreds and then tasked us with going through the notes on our days off while they sat at home, cruised on their yacht, or, my favorite, left the country entirely for a vacation. And they were a jerk to me and the rest of their overworked, underpaid staff. I was doing charts on their computer one day when I got curious and Googled Medicare fraud. They didn't like turning off computers in the office, so evidently either I forgot to close the window or they checked their search history because they seemed to notice this. For the rest of the time I worked there, we never had to code a chart independently again, and they were extremely nice to me. Now that I'm studying medicine, I realized that what they were doing was legitimately Medicare fraud, and I just didn't know. Story 7. Lost out on a promotion to leading hand, construction, due to nepotism. Nevertheless, I tried to give the guy some advice when I noticed some rookie mistakes appearing, but he promptly pulled rank and told me to follow orders. So the team and I complied with instructions to the letter, resulting in $500,000 damage, and the communications for a whole town were cut off, nearly causing the company to go under. Story 8. I had a manager try to persuade me into working on a day that I had booked off for a family funeral. It was not a direct relative, and I did not bother checking the official policy about what I was entitled to, but I did mention when I booked it off that it was for a funeral. Nothing was asked about who it was or if I was okay, but I did not offer any details. Anyway, the manager told me that Friday was not ideal for time off and asked if I could work anyway. I said no, it was for a funeral. He insisted, and I said I would let him know by the end of the day. I went back to my desk, looked up the policy, and emailed it to him. I said I would be off Friday as well as Monday, as per the bereavement policy, which allowed 2 days if it was family and 5 if it was a direct relative. Story 9. One of my former managers hated me because I was a robot who did their job and didn't want to attend pointless meetings every day to listen to her talk about weddings and babies when I had a lot of work to do, which she had ironically demanded of me. Anyway, a few months down the line I caught wind that she had asked human resources for pay raises for the other 2 members of our team who did the same job as me. I thought this was a little odd as I had outperformed them consistently for over 6 months, but it was personal for her. Knowing how incompetent and, quite frankly, dumb my manager was, I figured I would be able to catch her out quite easily. As predicted, with a bit of digging around, I found an unprotected manager folder on a shared network drive accessible by the entire company that contained a range of juicy documents, including one-to-one meeting notes between myself and my manager, as well as my manager and other employees. The notes on me were ridiculously negative with zero basis. I discovered pay raise request documents and other sensitive employee pay material, which resulted in a data protection breach. Fast forwarding a few months, after I won a tribunal case against the company because they naively chose to try to protect her and received a big payout, I found out that she had been demoted and is now working alongside the people she used to manage. I guess karma can be tough. The sad part is, I just wanted her to leave me alone and let me focus on my job. Story 10. My old business partner tried to enforce a non-compete, even though I was only doing residential work with the business I started. We had previously had long email discussions and arguments where he refused to do residential work and was very clear he was only ever going to do business to business. The non-compete got thrown out 5 seconds into arbitration. Sadly, I never got to use the emails I had saved. After we left the courthouse, I sat in my car calling every single customer I served when we were partners. Over 75% of them preferred my service over his and transitioned to my new business. I then called the only employee he had that actually knew what he was doing and worked hard, and made an offer for what he was actually worth. His pay went from $15 per hour under the old partner to $25 per hour, plus a monthly bonus and paid training under me. The best part is that I had brought most of those customers on board his business, took all their calls, and did all the work for them. I didn't even think of calling them until he put the idea in my head when he was arguing with the arbitrator that I was trying to steal his business. I thought, I was the one who built that entire part of your business. I wouldn't have ever called them if you didn't try to screw me. Story 11. I don't know about petty, but as a relatively new veterinarian, I worked for a clinic where the head nurse, who was also the practice manager, hated me. She referred to me as Dr. Fool behind my back, though she was all smiles to my face. Now, it's expected that new vets are going to make mistakes, and what few mistakes I did make never compromised a patient. I made mistakes completing paperwork and registries to her liking in a couple of instances, or leaving a difficult surgery for my more experienced boss to undertake instead of doing it myself, as I was not the most confident surgeon and didn't want to make a mess of the surgery. I found this out when she left her social media open on one of the clinic computers, where she had an account that prominently displayed her face, so she was immediately recognizable. She was publicly complaining about having to work with Dr. Fool. The problem here was that 3 vets worked at the clinic, my boss being one of them, and she could have been referring to any one of us. I took screenshots of the forum posts, emailed them to my boss, and pointed out how this could be detrimental to business by reducing client confidence in the clinic, since she was easily recognizable from her profile picture and was working directly with clients at the front desk. My boss was not happy about this and straight up asked me what I wanted to have happen in this situation. Since I was due to finish my stint at the clinic in a couple of months anyway, as I had spoken to my boss months before about getting a better surgeon in than I was, something the practice manager nurse was not aware of, I said I wasn't particularly worried since I wouldn't be working there anymore, but he and the remaining vets would be. I wanted to continue referring surgeries to a clinic that clients have confidence in, even after I leave. He also had taken the time to check client retention relative to each vet, and I had increased client retention by 30% during my 2 years at the practice. He fired her on the spot, and one of the more experienced nurses took over the job of practice manager. My last 2 months were a lot more enjoyable as a result. Story 12. My ex complained all the time about me not doing enough for her. I stopped doing all I was doing for her, and she apologized soon after when she realized just how much I was doing without asking for praise. I left her soon because, in reality, she wasn't doing anything for me. Story 13. I regularly butt heads with the sales team, so when I saw the sales director at the front door fumbling to get his access card out, instead of opening the door for him, I stood there and watched him struggle. It's a glass door, so he could see me standing 3 feet away, enjoying my coffee. Looked him dead in the eyes and smiled. Man, that felt great. Story 14. We had 2 managers who were treating people who worked in my department poorly, so I unionized all of my coworkers. It was a lengthy process, but once it was over, we started receiving overtime, better benefits, and better protections. Forget you, Maggie. Story 15. I was at a housewarming party for one of my best friends and his girlfriend. She had invited some of her friends who were doing basic training at the nearby military base. One of these guys took exception to me and would, throughout the evening, give me a shoulder shove with a little chin raise, like, "What are you going to do about it?" Every time he did this, I would move closer to him, each time a bit closer. Eventually, I had my body pressed up against his side and I nuzzled my head into the crook of his neck. He jumped back and was like, "Dude, what the heck?" I told him, "You keep touching me. I thought you wanted to be close." He stayed away from me the rest of the night. Story 16. I was recently moving out of a toxic living situation. When I sat down with my 2 roommates at the time to give them notice, I agreed to pay all bills up until 30 days from that day, as a courtesy and to try and maintain some semblance of a friendship with the one I had known for 6 years. They started to nickel and dime me on everything and decided that they wouldn't give me my portion of the security deposit. So after I moved out a week later, they texted me for the rest of the bills. I did the math and came to the conclusion that everything I would have owed would be less than my deposit. So I told them to just take what I owed out of my portion of the deposit. Felt good. Story 17. I work in information technology, and I had this colleague who was both bad at his job and unwilling to learn anything. He postponed solving tasks for weeks, blaming the environment or other dependencies. I knew he was just slacking, but I would have felt wrong going to the manager and telling on him. All the other colleagues knew as well. One day, I was assigned as a code reviewer for his task, which took 3 weeks to complete, even though it was a test that could have been done in one day. Apparently, he just copied and pasted some tests from another file, and of course, it didn't do what it was supposed to. I went over to him and said I had some questions about the code he wrote and asked him why he had written a certain line of code. He had no idea what that line was supposed to do, so he just stared at the screen. His silence was so awkward yet so satisfying. He tried evasive maneuvers like asking me what I would have done differently, but I stood my ground and asked again what his intention was. I did the same thing for the entire code he wrote, and he just broke down, started crying, and admitted he knew it was not good. He didn't confess he was slacking, but we both knew. I marked the review as incorrect, and he got pulled into a meeting with the manager. 30 minutes later, he came to me to ask for my help to complete the task. Story 18. I went to a Super Smash Bros. Tournament a few years back, and during one of the sets, the kid looked at me and said, "Yeah, I'm pretty good at this game. I won the last tournament here, so yeah." I looked at him and said, "Wow, that's pretty impressive." Game starts. I really beat this kid. Didn't even give him a chance. Absolutely destroyed him in front of his friends. He tries switching characters. I bury that character 6 feet deep and win the set. I get up and say, "Good game." He says, "Dang, dude, you're pretty good." Little did he know I was actually the guy that won the last tournament.